Hey, podcast listeners. Before we jump into today's episode, I want to share some exciting news with you. When we started the Luzon Movement podcast back in 2023, we had hoped that it would be more than just a one-way conversation. So, we've created a podcast community space on the Luzon Action Hub. This is a place where we can reflect more deeply on what we're learning, ask questions, share insights and stories about what God is doing in our context, and engage the global mission conversation with others from around the world. I'd personally love for you to be a part of it, and I'd especially love to hear how God is using the podcast to equip and inspire you in your ministry. You can find the link to the community in the show notes below, or go ahead and visit collaborate.luzon.org. And now, here are a few highlights from today's conversation.
Leadership is not just about the people we lead, it's about the organizations we run, and began to broaden into the organizational leadership aspect. When an organization is unhealthy, it actually sucks the energy away from the mission that God has given us. One of the things that holds leaders back from growing their organizations is just not knowing where to begin. God thinks generationally, and the Bible talks to that, God of 1,000 generations. It rises and falls on leadership, right? And so that's the beginning of it. Why are we not building healthy organizations that are actually going to reach into the next generation?
Welcome to the very first Luzon Movement podcast episode of 2026. In 2025, we focused our conversation on evangelism and discipleship. And this year, we're kicking off our new podcast season with a focus on Christ-like leadership, leading into conversations later in the year on kingdom impact. But today, we're exploring a crucial question every leader should ask. Are you leading for impact or just for your lifetime? Our guest today is Ian Connolly, Executive Director of the 54 Collective, a global initiative dedicated to helping ministry leaders like yourself build healthy, sustainable organizations. Drawing on years of experience consulting with businesses and ministries around the world, Ian invites us to rethink leadership and explores why organizational health is the invisible bridge between mission and lasting impact. So, if you are keen to unpack how you can strengthen the health of your leadership and your ministry, then I want to invite you to go ahead and grab your headphones and let's dive into today's interview with Ian Connolly. Well, Ian, welcome to the podcast. It's so great to have you with us today.
Thank you, Jason. And thank you for prioritizing this message this year. It's such a joy to be here with you and with your listeners today. So thank you for having me.
Wonderful. So we're going to dive into organizational leadership today, and we're going to talk about why that's important and how we can begin to apply these principles in our leadership. But this is kind of like a niche topic. And it's super interesting for me that you are in a ministry that helps other ministries become organizationally healthy in a way that they can do the mission that God has placed on their hearts to do. And I'd love to just hear your backstory, Ian, because this is such an interesting kind of ministry that you're a part of. So I want to give you some time just to share some of your story with us, how God grew this passion to help ministries become healthy.
Jason, I grew up following the Lord and involved in both business and ministry, nonprofit organizations, and family that were involved in both. I grew up here. I'm based in Cape Town now, but I grew up in Zimbabwe, in Southern Africa, and saw God move through ministry and through business, and then got involved with a lot of business work myself primarily, but also through that was involved in various nonprofit organizations and ministries, church. And through that time began to see the effect of both good and bad leadership. I think everybody has experienced good and bad leadership. Both of them mark us. In fact, if you sit for a moment and ponder back on your life, you'll recognize the leaders that really stand out for you, that have impacted your life, both positively and negatively. And just over time, this passion for leadership grew, and I started out my own consulting work, working with leaders, which for me is actually discipleship. That leadership is a really important calling on our lives in the kingdom. And so, yeah, just this heart for leadership and for the way we lead people, and that's where I began. And over time, began to realize that actually leadership is not just about the people we lead, it's about the organizations we run, and began to broaden into the organizational leadership aspect, which has been so rich. Just getting to walk alongside leaders is something that gives me the greatest joy. And I've had the privilege of journeying with many leaders around the world, and to see the way they grow and learn and apply their leadership into their organizations is really inspiring. And so I've learned from others along the way, observed what works, what doesn't work. And so, yeah, my backstory is growing up in a context of Southern Africa, where I've experienced significantly bad leadership, and starting to grow a passion for good leadership and what that looks like, and how far we fall from how just the reality of what that is. So that's a little bit of my backstory.
Wonderful. I would love to dive a little bit deeper into something that you said there, because, over the course of the past year or so, as I've engaged with leaders from across the world, and the topic of leadership has come up, there has been some antagonism, to almost the term being used in church and leadership development, for instance. Um, and you mentioned that you feel that leadership is part of discipleship. Could you share a little bit why you believe that? Because I believe that too. And for me, it's just been an interesting experience as people have been reacting to this whole leadership conversation within churches and ministry.
I think a lot of that antagonism comes from the fact that we've had such bad experiences of leadership. And whenever I experience that within any context, whether it's family or organization, I feel the sadness, because it doesn't have to be that way. It's not hard to lead well, and yet we've just made such a mess of it in so many circumstances. And so actually leading well is incredibly life-giving and empowering to others around us. And so for me, walking alongside leaders and modeling and demonstrating how to lead well is discipleship. Well, that's what discipleship is, right? It's equipping others to follow Christ and to follow his footsteps. And he is the most incredible leader. If you just take the leadership lens and read the story of Jesus and the way he leads, it's phenomenal. So simply being able to apply that into our lives, apply those principles, and to value and care for people above all else, is really the story behind that. So I've loved inspiring leaders to realize the importance of their role and to take it seriously and to invest in themselves and to invest in others. And we'll get more into that as we talk about why organizational leadership matters as well.
Yeah, wonderful. So you are a part of the 54 Collective. You were in business consultation, and then you moved into this kind of full-time ministry space. For the listeners who have never heard of 54 Collective, can you just explain the backstory to that as well? Because I also think it's beautiful, and maybe also explain like what you as an organization are trying to achieve.
Yes, I was involved in business consulting, but also did a lot of work at that stage with nonprofit organizations and ministries, and leadership principles across all organizations. But I then linked up with a foundation based here in Stellenbosch in South Africa called the Mergon Foundation. They invest in over 100 ministries around Africa and the Middle East, walking alongside them. And they had begun to realize and prioritize investment into the leadership of those organizations. And they asked me to come on board to lead the work that they were doing in terms of the organizational development and leadership development. And through that process, I began to be exposed to, in a very, very deep way, into the challenges of leading ministries and nonprofit organizations, and began to have a real passion for it. And as we began to walk alongside ministries, we realized there was a huge gap for ministry leaders in terms of resourcing. When you look at what's available for business leaders online and how to lead a business, the resources are extensive. You can find resources on anything you like, but when you start to look at resources available for ministry leaders, it is very limiting. And we just felt like there was more. There was something in that space that we wanted to tap into. And so the idea of an online learning platform that equipped leaders to grow healthy organizations began to emerge. And then when we talked about that, we realized, well, if we're going to build an online learning platform, we might as well make it available globally. Let's not make it just available for the ministries that Mogon support.
Yeah.
Let's make it available all over the world. And so got on a few other foundations to walk alongside us. And so Mogon Foundation, together with McClellan Foundation based in the United States and 3W Foundation based in the Czech Republic, came together in our first forming of this movement in 2022. And we said, let's form something. And then we had to go through, what do we call it? What's the heart behind this? And we've really wrestled with the values around it as well. And how do we come together and how do we do this well together? But there was such a sense of unity as we sat together that this work really mattered. And I think that for me at the time, being at that meeting, was a sense of God saying, this is something that I'm birthing. This is not yours. And that has been important for us, that we're kind of carrying a calling, not a mission that we just feel is important. And so we called it 54, and the name 54 comes from Isaiah 54 verse 2, where God says, stretch out your tent cords, drive your pegs in deeper. I'm going to expand you to the left and to the right. And it's probably the greatest verse around capacity building or organizational development that there is, because God is an expansive God and his kingdom is expanding across the face of the earth. And our organizations need to be healthy and ready for that. And so we felt that really pointed to the importance of this topic from Scripture. And so we named it 54. And we're after just equipping every ministry everywhere in the world to reach their full potential. It's a free platform, fully funded. There's no charge for users. And the idea is that this is high quality learning, high quality resources that really equip ministry leaders to build healthy organizations.
Yeah, as you were just sharing there about the lack of resources for ministries, I think that also might be linked to the discontent that some leaders have about leadership. Is that as churches and ministries and nonprofits, we've had to draw from insights coming from business when it comes to leadership, when it comes to running an organization in a healthy way. And there are very awesome principles that we can learn from business and all of those spaces, but there is this contextualization that needs to happen as well, and some things are appropriate and some things aren't appropriate. And what I love about what you guys have been able to develop is biblically centered, like nonprofit ministry organizational principles that can be applied across the spectrum. And so I'm really looking forward to diving into the details of all of that. But I still want to go a little bit deeper here, because there might be some leaders who, are listening to this and they're just saying, why are we even talking about organizational health? And we have touched a bit on it, but I want to go deeper. Why do you believe, you've worked with hundreds of ministries across the world, businesses across the world, why do you believe organizational health and growth matters for Christian ministry specifically, and not just in like general leadership terms?
Yeah. It's such an important topic. And one of the things that excites me most around the work of 54 is how leaders come back and say they've begun to prioritize the health of their organization because of the work we're doing. That excites me the most. And the reason for that is because I think as leaders, we tend to think very much in our own timeline, our own lives.
Mm-hmm.
It's so hard to think beyond our own lives. And yet God thinks generationally. And the Bible talks to that, God of 1,000 generations. God is not just thinking about my work and what I'm doing now. He's thinking beyond my lifetime and beyond the lifetime of the next generation. So God is a generational God. Most of us in ministry space, whether it's a nonprofit or church, we're actually working to address issues that we will not solve in our lifetime. I haven't yet come across a leader or a ministry that is actually going to solve the issue that they're trying to solve in their lifetime, and it'll disappear. And so why are we building organizations that are just built for our lifetime? Why are we not building healthy organizations that are actually going to reach into the next generation? That's the first thing. And then the second thing as to why this topic really matters is because I think we are carrying missions that God has given us. We're on a mission. God is most leaders will say, this is a mission that God has given me, and I am going for this. This is something that is a calling on my life. And one of the things that I've seen time and time again is that when an organization is unhealthy, it actually sucks the energy away from the mission that God has given us. It sucks it inward, and we get stuck in trying to deal with internal things, as opposed to an organization that is thriving and healthy, where that energy can really be focused outwards onto the mission. And so it's a generational issue, but it's a mission impact issue too, that we as leaders need to build organizations that can really focus their energy onto the mission that God has given us in order to honor his name and to glorify him and to allow God to do the work through us that he wants to do. And we mess that up so often. We don't get it right. And it doesn't have to be that way.
I love that perspective that you brought in about how our ministries are generational and thinking beyond just the short term, which is in this perspective our lifetime, right? And it kind of, for me, it resonated with your testimony about how the 54 Collective came together and you felt like this wasn't yours, it belonged to God. And I think so often we can forget that our churches as pastors belong to God. They don't belong to us. The ministries that God has set in our hearts and the vision he's given us belongs to him. And all the ministry that we're doing, it belongs to him. And that means it goes beyond us. And so that perspective is actually like really helpful. And I think it's a framing that I haven't heard, at least in a way that I've remembered it. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. I was curious as I was preparing for this interview. We've chatted offline before. We've had a meeting last year, and I know that you had been dealing with both the businesses and with ministries. And I was curious, as you kind of have been in these spaces, what have been the most important differences that you've noticed between organizational health, between the nonprofit ministries and that of businesses? Have there been any distinctions? Are there any clear patterns that you've seen?
Jason, I just want to before I answer your question, I want to highlight just what you were saying, which I think is a really important point about the organizations, that the work we carry is not ours, it is the Lord's. And that's a question of identity for us as leaders, is am I identified by the work and the mission, or am I identified by who God says I am? And I think that's a really important point you made. I just wanted to highlight that. Differences between business leadership and leading a ministry, leading a nonprofit. The first thing I would say is that it is far, far tougher to lead a ministry or a nonprofit of a similar scale as it is to lead a business of the same size. Having been in the business space, I often looked down on nonprofit leaders and thought little of them, and I repent of that, because actually, in walking alongside leaders of nonprofits and ministries around the world, I began to realize how much harder it is for them. And so, firstly, to say that the big difference is that it's much, much tougher. And in fact, Jim Collins talks about that, about it being much, much harder to lead a nonprofit ministry. So yeah, I think that's the main thing for me, is just that they are so different, and they are and yet there are principles that apply across both when it comes to people leadership. But the reality is that they are very different. And to lead a ministry, to lead a nonprofit, to pull people into a mission with very little resources and to achieve that mission is incredible. And I've constantly been astounded and inspired by leaders of some of the organizations we've worked with who, with very little, have achieved incredible results and made such a big impact into the communities they're serving and to the people around them. It's inspiring, actually. So, yeah, I'm not sure if you want to probe that a bit deeper, but
I mean, I actually would, because I mean, I hear that, and I'm actually really encouraged by it. But I wonder why you say that. Why is it tougher? Because I think it would be helpful for the ministry leaders hearing this to understand why you're saying what you're saying.
I think the rules of business are a lot clearer, and the methodology and operational aspect of businesses. And I'm not saying leading a business is easy. I know that business leadership is very tough, and I think it's a calling too. I'm very much of the belief that that business is an important part of the kingdom of God, and in terms of what God is doing and resourcing around the world and equipping. It's a really, really important piece. So I don't want to belittle business leaders either. I come from a business background, and I have a real passion for the value of business. And I think one of the things I feel sad about is that there's not enough interaction of business leaders and ministry leaders. There tends to be the separation that you're talking about here. But why it's tougher, I think one is because particularly leading a kingdom nonprofit, a God-inspired nonprofit or ministry, has a lot of different challenges to it. We have a lot of different expectations about how God is going to show up for us and how God is going to lead us through this. And God's given us this mission, so surely God will therefore do this. And at least expectations that we're going to be disappointed with. And I come into a nonprofit or a ministry that is led by someone who professes to be a follower of Christ, with expectations of how they will lead, and it results in unmet expectations and disappointment and hurt. And those are harder to deal with because it's not just human to human. There's a faith challenge that comes out of that. So one, I mean, the bringing faith element into leadership of a nonprofit organization or ministry is really difficult. The second is that funding is very limited. Trying to get investment as a business, if you've got a good business plan and you've got a great product and you can show future cash flow generation, you can raise capital to get support and to walk alongside your donors. And in terms of what the donors demand or expect of you as a leader, as a ministry leader, is incredibly difficult. And so there's that aspect to it. And then you've got communities who you can see are broken, and you can see the challenges, and you're longing to bring something to them that will bring wholeness and healing for them. And that's a learning journey in and of itself. It's not easy to jump in and just resolve the problems around us. We've got to learn and grow and walk together. And there's a lot of pain that comes out of that. And so burnout of leaders in nonprofit organizations and ministries is so prevalent. I've walked with many leaders who spent 4, 5, 6 months dealing with burnout on a sofa or lying on their bed, unable to get up and go. And it is hugely challenging for them and for the organization when that happens. And it happens often because the need is so great around us. So if you're listening to this and you're leading a ministry or a nonprofit, just much grace and strength to you. It's a long haul. Don't run too hard and burn yourself out. I just walk at a rhythm that enables you to sustain this work for your lifetime and for the generations after you.
Ian, as you were just talking, I just realized, and I was taken back to my time in seminary. I had I had a call from the Lord to go into full-time ministry, and like many who do, who have the opportunity, I went to seminary to prepare me for the ministry that God was calling me to. And at seminary, you learn so many beautiful things about God, about His Word, about the kingdom. But what at least the seminary I was in didn't prepare me for was it didn't prepare me for leadership and leading the ship, of the ministry that God was going to entrust me with. And I think for me, that is a clear distinction that I see between my friends who are in business. They might go and study like business studies, and they get taught how to run an organization, how to lead people, how to raise funds, how to have conversations about investments, all those kind of things, how to run the books, finances. And for me, as I've dived into what you guys have been able to provide through 54, it's almost like that education that I never received. And so I would love for us to now dive a little bit deeper into what you guys provide. You have what you call the 9D assessment, which I'd love to give you opportunity to speak on. And we're going to spend a lot of time here because you guys have identified these 9 dimensions of health. So can you take a moment before I ruin the interview by talking about it myself? What is the 9D assessment? How did you land on these 9 dimensions? And just unpack the framework for us if you can.
Jason, before I answer your question, I just want to highlight again the comment you made. We built 54, we built it for nonprofit organizations. And over time, began to see church leaders taking it up and pastors taking it up. And we began to hear that story, exactly what you've just said, that I've been trained to do theology. I've been trained to be a pastor, but I haven't been trained and equipped to lead an organization. And invariably, if you lead successfully, you're going to end up leading an organization. And whether it's a church or a nonprofit, they need to be organized well. And how to do that effectively is important. And so, yeah, it's really shaped how we built the 54 platform and the 9D assessment. And essentially, one of the things we noticed was that for leaders is that complexity of leading an organization is really difficult. And we'll talk more about complexity. But one of the things that holds leaders back from growing their organizations is just not knowing where to begin. And so we thought, what about an assessment that actually helps them look at their organization, think about where they're at, and then gain focus on where I need to grow my organization next. And so we designed an assessment to do that. We designed the 9D assessment. We built it. We tested it online. And we began to see leaders really gaining clarity about where to focus their attention, of how to grow their organization. And so began to see it having an impact. And I love sitting with leaders and running a 9D feedback session and seeing them come in feeling overwhelmed and walking away with just real clarity of this is what I'm going to focus on next. So the 9D assessment is a core part of the 54 platform. It's designed to give leaders a view of their organization and where they're at and the steps they need to take in order to just become a healthier organization.
Okay, so 54 has got all these resources that you can equip yourself with. You also have this 9D assessment, which assesses you, gives you a good idea of where you're at in an organization. It might point you in the direction of different resources that you should engage in first. Can we unpack just for a moment? I think the first question I have is who gets to do this assessment? Is it available to everyone? Is it for senior leaders of an organization? Is it for everyone? How would you suggest someone listening to this can go about engaging with the assessment? So that's the first thing. And then on top of that, so you can just follow on, is can you unpack the 9 different dimensions for us and how you kind of came to those?
Yeah. So the assessment is, again, freely available for anybody to use. You can go in and register your organization, register your team into your organization, and then set them up to run the 9D assessment together. We encourage leaders to do it with their senior leadership team. And if you're a small organization, then do it all together. It's an opportunity for you to start to say, hey, where are we at? Where are we going? What is the next step we need to take? And those conversations are incredibly rich. The opportunity to start to dream a bit together, to set some goals together about how we want to grow our organizations is important. So it's a very simple process. You go online, you register yourself on our 54.global site, and that's the words 54, FIFTYFOUR.global. And you can go in and register for the assessment, and you can take any of the courses that are available. There are 93 courses available on the platform now, all of them designed with specialists, with experts on the topics that we're talking about on the 9 dimensions. and centered around equipping leaders to grow healthy ministries. There are live sessions we run once a month with those specialists. We have conversations with them, a bit like you and I are having now, where we just dialogue with them about what they're hearing about that specific area that they specialize in. We had an amazing session this month with Malcolm Weber, who leads LeaderSource, and just around equipping the next generation, forming the leaders who will follow after us. And such a dynamic, rich conversation, all biblically based, all God-centered, and all really coming from a place of a heart to equip leaders. So the second question was, why 9 dimensions? And so we started out with 11 as we looked at what are the different aspects of leading an organization and how do we frame that. We came up with 11 different categories that we thought were important for organizational leadership. As we looked for numerical symmetry, and so we realized 54, 5 plus 4 is 9. No, but I think as we looked at the 11, it felt like it felt a little bit clunky. It felt too much. And we felt that if you go too light or too few, you're going to miss some of the core aspects of leading an organization. If you go too many, it gets very complex. And so we came up with 9 dimensions. The first is leadership. And so everything centers around leadership. When it rises and falls on leadership, right? And so that's the beginning of it. And then we've got mission and vision and people, teams, and values. And so how you form your teams and how you build together really matters. We've got communications. And so how you communicate who you are, how you communicate the stories of your impact, the visuals that you use are all really important. So how do you do that well? And then funding. And so how do we build partnerships with the people who will walk alongside us, who align with us from a mission and vision perspective? The 6th dimension is strategy. We need to be clear on the strategy that we're going to use to achieve the mission that God has given us. And then the 7th one is operations and finance. How do we manage ourselves well? What are the rhythms we need to have in place? And how do we ensure that our financial management is transparent in order to build trust with our stakeholders? The 8th one is board and governance. And so governance is a huge topic, a really important topic for any organization to sustain itself generationally. And so we've got some amazing equipping there with Pat McMillan, who has tremendous experience in board and governance development globally. And then the 9th dimension is impact evaluation. How do we ensure that our strategy is working? How do we ensure that we're actually fulfilling the mission that God has given us? And so the 11 became those 9. And that just came from our research into various assessments that were available online and from our own experience in organizational leadership. I feel really comfortable with the 9. And as we've used it with different ministries and different leaders, we've seen it become a framework that gives them such clarity on where to focus their growth. And so it's a framework that I think is gaining quite a lot of traction. And I'm excited about the 9. I mean, it doesn't have to be 9. It could be anything. And some might argue it should be 10, 11, 12. We've settled on that and we're going for that. And the 90 assessment is based around those 9 different aspects of organizational leadership.
Yeah, and what I love about these is, even as you were just listing them out, and I've read them before, I'm thinking about my own organization. I'm thinking about the Lausanne movement, and I'm kind of going through them, and you can almost feel where there's growth to be had or where there's wins to celebrate. Do the same with my church. I can go through this list and easily begin to, even from a gut response, begin to kind of figure out where we can grow and where we can celebrate. I'd be curious to hear from you. You've had hundreds of ministries kind of go through this 90 assessment. What patterns keep showing up? Is there a dimension that is often where the biggest gap is? Or is it quite across the board? Some organizations are terrible at leadership, but they're fantastic at communication. I mean, I'd just be curious if there's any patterns that you've seen.
We do see a lot of patterns and a lot of trends, and it's very interesting for me, because one of the things I'm most excited about is that the more we start to get an awareness of leaders and the challenges they're facing in different regions, the more we can actually create resources and learning that equips them and supports them in that process. And so like regional patterns becomes really interesting down the line for us. We're starting to see a little bit of that already. We've only been going for not even 2 years yet. So this is very new, very fresh. Our user base is growing. We're being used in 120 countries. And so it's already, we're seeing God take the reach of this quite wide. But some of the patterns that excite me and are also very interesting are also perhaps the limitations. The first is that most ministries rate their vision and their mission high. That's the highest rated of the 9 dimensions. And most leaders have a real sense of affinity and calling and alignment with the mission and the vision that they carry. And yet at the same time, mission drift is a real issue. And so staying on mission is really hard as a ministry. And so, that's one of the big ones that we see, is that people rate most highly is their mission and vision. I feel a sense of excitement about what they're after together. What people rate lowest is funding. And so for most ministries, funding is a real challenge, and having sufficient financial resources in order to fulfill the mission we have is probably the thing that we feel the most and battle with the most, and probably causes the most anxiety. One of the greatest causes of anxiety for leaders is around being funded and having sufficient funding to pay our staff, to meet our requirements, to keep this organization alive. And that takes a huge amount of energy. And we've got fantastic courses on how to build great partnership, how to find the people who are going to walk alongside you and partner with you, and not just to come with a list of here's my needs. And so that's a really important aspect as well. And then, so as I said, there's 57 practices that those 9 dimensions break down into. And I think the other trend that we're seeing is that mission and vision are high, people, teams, and values are rated high, and people generally rate their leadership quite high. But what consistently comes down at the bottom, if you go a level deeper into those different dimensions, is the equipping of the next generation of leaders. That's where a lot of leaders are struggling. And so leadership handover is a massive issue. We've got great content and resources on how to hand over your leadership to the next leader, and the importance of that and the process to go through behind that, and not just to leave it till late. I've encountered so many organizations where leadership handover is done badly, and the result is that the organization struggles and stutters after that. In fact, it often falls away and dies and doesn't ever recover to the full capability that it has. And so that's a real point of sadness for me, is that's the lowest rated piece in a lot of the different dimensions, is our ability to hand over to the next generation. And it's a really tough one. I mean, handing over to the next generation or next leader is really, really difficult. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes energy to get it right. And often we don't stop and think about it. We don't process it. We don't give it over to God and allow God to bring us the right people, where it's too much in our own identity. It's, there's so many different factors in it, but that's one of the biggest challenges for leaders that we see.
Yeah, and that is a really fascinating thing to hear, especially we as a movement, we're preparing for 2027. We're going to have a younger leaders gathering. I would love to give you an opportunity to chat to the next generation, the next generational leaders who might be listening in. They might not be in the senior leadership position, but they're hearing this conversation about organizational leadership, and they might be seeing the gaps in their organization. What advice do you have for them? Like when they're experiencing this 90 assessment and all these principles, like how can they apply this as, maybe second chair leaders, or maybe they're not even in that position yet of influence? I would love to hear what advice you have for the younger generation.
Perhaps before I do that, a bit of advice to the older generation, or the leaders are in place, which is that having walked with many organizations, one of the greatest frustrations I hear for leaders below the first tier, if you like, and so the sort of next generation of leaders, is that real frustration of, I've got so much energy, I've got so much alignment to the mission, I've got so many ideas, and I bring it all, and it's not heard, it's not implemented. I feel misunderstood, I feel undervalued, I feel like my voice doesn't matter. And if you are leading an organization and you're telling your leaders that your opinion matters, but you're not acting on it, you're not taking their ideas and you're not implementing them, you are definitely setting yourself up to lose those leaders at some point. And so it's a great source of frustration for middle leaders, if you like. And then, I mean, if you're a younger leader and you're in that organization, it's a really difficult one, this, because you've got so much to bring, and you've got a passion for change, and you're probably more ready and adaptable for change than the senior leaders are. I just wanted to read something that Charles Spurgeon wrote this. He said, "The seasons change and you change, but the Lord abides evermore the same. And the streams of his love are as deep and as broad and as full as ever." And that really stirs me, because I think a lot of younger leaders are running for change and wanting to bring change. And there's just like, temper that, be patient. Don't come at it from a place of anxiety. Come at it from a place of, God has not changed, and his streams are as broad and as full as ever. And so, first of all, to younger leaders, anxious pressure or anxious pushing for change is not fruitful. It never will be. So that's the first thing. The second thing, as I would say, is guard your heart. Like, check your motive. Why do I feel like this is important? And often leaders who've gone before us, maybe there's frustration and jadedness from them because of experiences over their lives, but take time to understand their story. So check your heart and take time to understand their story before you come in with how you think it should be. And then lastly, I would say to younger leaders is retain unity, like fight for unity above change. The power of unity is incredible. It's something about unity that attracts the presence of God. The Bible's full of stories of unity and the importance of unity and the priority of unity. And so for younger leaders, prioritize that unity. Don't let the desire for change trump the desire for unity.
And we're going to have to begin to wrap up this conversation. But I would love to hear from you. You might have seen many organizations begin this process of saying, yes, and leaders, we want to get healthy, we want to grow. But from your experience, and this is, we are recording this in January, so we all have the kind of those experiences of saying, okay, this year is going to be different. What have you seen that has separated the leaders and the organizations that have taken the test and then and the assessment and actually got healthier over time from the ministries that have taken the assessment and don't necessarily get any healthier? They kind of remain stagnant.
There are two things I would say to that. The first is have real focus. Like, just focus on one thing at a time. One of the things that I mentioned this earlier is that holds leaders back from growing their organizations is complexity and not knowing where to begin and where to go next. And so don't overthink it. Leaders are so stuck in the running of the organization and the day-to-day. You need to be able to step back and go, where are we going? What are the dreams and the goals that we're carrying? Where are we at now? And when you look at your 9D results and think about what are we doing well, what are we not doing so well, it starts to emerge quite clearly as to where we need to focus next and just do one thing. I remember doing a 9D feedback session with a ministry here in Cape Town, and sitting with them, and we spent 3 hours together working through the outcomes and looking at where they're going and looking at where they're at. And they came away with one thing they were going to do, which is to take time to review their strategy. And they booked a into their calendars a time when they would go away together and review their strategy and see why it wasn't working and see what was working and renew it. And I remember leaving that conversation feeling a little bit underwhelmed, like I hadn't really given them enough. And actually going back and interacting with them afterwards, I realized that clarity had been incredibly life-giving for them, that they just had the one thing they were going to go and do. And so that's the first thing, is like just get real focus. And the second thing is to build organizational growth into the rhythms of your organization every week. So it's not doing a whole lot of things the whole time. I've got to do all these 9 things all at once. No, just find one. Just choose one of those dimensions and focus on it and build it over time. Over the next 3 months, take the next 3 months to choose one dimension and improve the way you lead and the way you as an organization run in that one dimension. And then build it into your rhythms of every week. Make it a discussion point. How are we going to improve our funding? Okay, let's talk about that. Let's spend time thinking about where we're at. And just make it a once a week conversation. Make it a rhythm. And so the organizations that are really successful have focus and they have consistency in their application of their organizational development.
Wow. Actually, I really appreciate that. And I think even from a personal point of view, perhaps we would get a lot more done in our lives. And at the start of our new year, if we just focused on one thing at a time, because it removes that feeling of being overwhelmed by all the things that you know that you need to do or you feel that you need to do. Ian, this has been a wonderful conversation. I would love to give you an opportunity. We've spoken about it at length, but where can people go if they want to take their next steps from this conversation, such as learn more about 54 Collective or take the assessment or connect with you? Can you just point us clearly to those next steps?
Please encourage people to reach out to me if they'd like to. You can use the general 54 email address, which is just info@54.global, or email me directly, Ian, IAN, @54.global. Again, that's 54 written words, not the numbers. The website 54.global is, as I said, completely free. You can log on, you can sign up, you can access all the courses, join a live session. We've got a live session coming up in February where we're going to talk about strategy and the importance of strategy and how to plan your strategy in a simple, effective way as a leader. And so I'm excited about that conversation. And those are free to join. It's a 1-hour conversation once a month. They're recorded. They're available on YouTube as well under the 54 site. So users can jump on and use that or reach out to me. But I would encourage leaders, again, time is difficult for leaders, right? To find the time to do a course or to find the time to do a 90 assessment. These things take time, and they are a priority. They are important. So take 30 minutes and do a course. Our courses are all designed to be something that you can do over your lunch break. They're not 3-month or 3-week or 3-day courses. They're 30-minute courses. Leaders can simply jump on and do a course over 30 minutes during their lunch break or in an evening, and you're going to walk away with some really tangible things to apply within your organization's development. And so, and if taking the time to do a course or to do the 90 assessment feels a bit overwhelming, just go to 54.global and have a look at the 9 dimensions and start to think about where you're at and where you want to start to focus your growth at. Which dimension are you going to begin with? And that can be a very simple starting point for leaders as well.
Well, that's great, Ian. I'm going to make sure that I put that in the show notes for everyone. So if they're driving or exercising or whatever they're doing and they couldn't take notes there, you can go into the show notes and you can find the email addresses and the websites and the links to the YouTube channel. Ian, as we close this off, do you have, there was a lot that we could have spoken about and perhaps we should have spoken about, but are there any last thoughts that you'd like to leave with our audience?
Jason, that's a hard one to narrow down, but I guess, one of the things I've seen for leaders is it's quite lonely. Often leaders feel alone in leading their organizations. It is tough. And we started with this about why this topic matters. And it's because leading an organization, leading a ministry is hard. There's so much hurt, there's so much pain, there's so much challenge, there's so much struggle, and it's not easy. And so often what emerges out of that is an aloneness, a loneliness. And one of the things I'm seeing within the 54 site is that it's community. It's the sense of you're not alone. And I think that's the thing I would say to leaders is actually you are not alone. There are many who are walking a similar path, who understand the challenges, the struggles, the pain, the tears, and they understand the joys as well, and the motivation. So you're not alone. Find community to walk with you. If it's at 54 or somewhere else, if it's in Lausanne movement, find leaders to walk with you. If you're facing challenges and feeling the struggles, I can guarantee other leaders have been through or are going through similar things and are able to identify and walk with you. And one of the things we see is this increasing community at 54 of just being able to share our stories and share our challenges and walk together and to know that we're not alone. And then finally, God has made us unique. We are actually all alone, but that doesn't have to lead to loneliness. And so our aloneness is an important part of our design, and God celebrates that and loves that and loves who we are. And so we're not just alone in terms of other leaders, but God is with us. God is walking with us as the energy and the resources and all that we need to sustain us. So I trust that's encouraging to anyone who is feeling the burden of their leadership at the moment.
Yeah, and I love that because we've been speaking a lot about, organizations and principles, and at the end of the day, we are all just people, and we have our flaws, and we feel the burden of the mission that God has given all of us, and we carry that very heavily. And so, I really appreciate the way that you have kind of brought us back to that point of encouraging us that we are unique, that we don't have to be alone, that we need each other. And so as we begin to wrap up here, I would like to ask if you're willing to just pray for those who have listened up into this point, and just pray over the leaders, pray over the organizations. So would you lead us in prayer as we close up?
Be a real joy to do that. Thanks, Jason. God, thank you that you are a God who chooses to establish your kingdom on earth through us, your sons and your daughters. That is deeply humbling that you would choose to do that through us, God. And so we just want to give ourselves to you afresh and bow our knee to you, Lord of Lords. You alone are worthy of our praise and of our lives, of our every breath. We worship you, God. And I pray for every leader who's listening to this. It is lonely. It is tough leading organizations. We get so many different scars and bruises and bumps along the way. Yeah, but you're the God who heals and sustains. And I pray that every leader who's listened to this and who is joining in this moment of prayer now, just, Lord, that you would, by your Spirit, bring life and healing and wholeness, that you'd bring strength to every leader, you'd bring clarity for their organizations, that you would enable them to stretch out their tent cords wide, to drive their pegs in deep, and that you would expand their work to the left and to the right. You're the God who expands. You're the God of expansion. And so would you expand the ministries of every leader listening to this, and just give them the strength and the resilience and the fortitude they need. Yeah, just bless them and their work, I pray, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Yeah, and once again, I just want to thank you. Thank you so much for your time. This has been a gift to me, and I know that it's been a gift to those who are listening.
Thank you, Jason. It's such a joy to spend some time talking with you about this, and thank you for this work that you're doing. And just, the Lord bless you too and your family and the work of your hands. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.